There is footage of Michael Jackson that most people have never seen. Not the music videos, not the concert films, not the carefully staged television appearances where every frame was controlled and every angle was approved. This is different footage. Footage that slipped through the cracks of one of the most tightly managed public images in entertainment history. Footage that was captured in the spaces between the performances, in the quiet hallways, the private rooms, the unguarded seconds when the king of pop forgot, just for a moment, that a camera was running. And when you watch it, when you actually sit with these rare, unscripted moments, you realize something that changes the way you see everything else. The man the world thought it knew was almost nothing like the man these cameras accidentally caught. Most people understand Michael Jackson through the greatest hits version of his life. Thriller, the moonwalk, the glove, the trial, the headlines, the death, the legacy. That version is real, in the sense that all those things happened. But it is a version constructed almost entirely from moments that were intended to be seen. Moments that went through layers of management and approval and careful image control before they ever reached the public eye. What these rare camera moments reveal is something entirely different, something that the version built for public consumption specifically worked to conceal. Not because it was shameful, but because it was human. And humanity, for Michael Jackson, was the one luxury that fame almost entirely revoked. The first category of rare footage that tells a story nobody expected is the backstage material. Not the polished behind-the-scenes content produced for DVD releases. The actual backstage footage, the stuff shot on handheld cameras by crew members and assistants who were just documenting their workday and happened to be standing near one of the most famous human beings on Earth. In that footage, Michael moves differently, talks differently, laughs in a way that almost never appears in anything filmed for public consumption. The laugh is real in those moments. Uncontrolled, sometimes surprisingly loud, sometimes almost silent, shoulders shaking, head down, the kind of laughter that happens when something genuinely catches you off guard rather than when you are performing delight for an audience. And every time that laugh appears in raw backstage footage, it lands like a small shock. Because it is so completely at odds with the carefully composed, softly spoken, almost otherworldly public persona that the world had accepted as the complete picture of who he was. But that's not even the most revealing category of rare footage. Because scattered across private collections, court evidence archives, documentary outtakes, and the personal recordings of people who spent time around Michael Jackson over 5 decades, there are moments of him simply existing without performance. Sitting in a car, looking out the window. Walking through an airport before the security detail had fully formed around him. Standing in a kitchen somewhere, eating something ordinary, in ordinary clothes, looking like someone who desperately wanted to be nobody for just a few more minutes. Those moments are almost painful to watch once you understand the context. Because they are the moments that reveal, without any possibility of misinterpretation, the gap between the life Michael Jackson was performing and the life he was actually living. And that gap, that silent, invisible distance between the public version and the private one, was where the real story was always hiding. The child footage is perhaps the rarest and most important of all. Because there exists, in various archives and private collections, footage of Michael Jackson as a child performer that has never been widely circulated. Not the polished Ed Sullivan appearances. Not the Motown specials. But footage from rehearsals, from sound checks, from the in-between moments of a performing childhood that most people have never stopped to actually examine. And what you see in that footage is a child who is extraordinary and also, unmistakably, under pressure that no child should be carrying. Watch his eyes in the rehearsal footage sometime. Not during the performance itself, where the training kicks in and the performer takes over. But in the seconds before it starts. The waiting moments. The moments when he thinks nobody is looking at his face because they are all looking at the choreography. In those seconds, you can see it. A child doing the emotional math of what is expected of him. Calculating, at an age when most children are simply being, exactly what kind of performance will satisfy the adults in the room. That footage is rare because nobody wanted to look at it too closely. Because looking at it too closely makes it impossible to celebrate the extraordinary talent without simultaneously grieving what produced it. What happened next in this story of rare footage is something that shocked even longtime fans who thought they had seen everything. Because in 2009, when Michael Jackson died and the world began the process of sorting through his legacy, certain footage emerged from the This Is It rehearsals that nobody had anticipated. Not the polished film released in theaters a few months after his death. The raw rehearsal footage, unedited, sometimes mid-take, with Michael stopping to give notes, to demonstrate exactly what he wanted, to show a dancer or a musician the precise quality of movement or sound he was reaching for. And in that footage, in those final weeks of his life when his body was struggling and the pressure of 50 scheduled concerts was closing in from every direction, you can see something that the theatrical release of This Is It deliberately softened. You can see a man who is simultaneously more musically brilliant than almost anyone alive, and more physically and emotionally depleted than any of the people around him were publicly willing to acknowledge. The brilliance and the depletion, sitting right next to each other in the same frame. That is the rarest kind of footage. The kind that tells the truth about two things at once. The fan interaction footage deserves its own category entirely. Because scattered across decades of public appearances, there exists footage of Michael Jackson interacting with fans in moments that were not staged, not orchestrated, not filtered through a publicist's calculations. And what those moments consistently reveal is something that contradicts almost every caricature that was constructed around him during his most controversial years. He was present, genuinely, completely present with individual human beings in a way that people who had enormous fame rarely manage. There is footage of him stopping a motorcade to personally greet a fan who had been waiting for hours. Footage of him sitting with sick children in hospital corridors, not for a camera crew, not for a charitable organization's press release, but simply because he was there and they were there and he apparently could not walk past a child in pain without stopping. That footage is rare not because it was hidden, but because it was ordinary. And ordinary kindness, performed without an audience, without documentation, without strategic intent, doesn't generate the kind of attention that conflict and controversy generate. So it slipped through the cracks of the narrative. And it stayed there, and this is where things take a turn that most people aren't prepared for. Because among the rarest footage ever captured of Michael Jackson, is footage from inside Neverland Ranch during its operational years that was never intended for public distribution. Not the Martin Bashir documentary footage, which was specifically filmed for broadcast. But footage captured by staff members, by visitors, by the cameras that were simply running as part of the security and documentation systems of an enormous private estate. In that footage, you see Neverland functioning as what Michael always said it was. A place of genuine joy. Children from local hospitals and charitable organizations riding the amusement rides, watching movies in the private theater, meeting the animals in the zoo. Michael moving through those moments with a quality of presence and delight that, once you've seen it, is very difficult to square with the darkest interpretations of what Neverland represented. The footage doesn't resolve the controversies. Nothing can fully do that. But it adds a dimension to the story that the controversy-focused coverage almost entirely omitted. The dimension of a person who found genuine, uncomplicated happiness in very specific circumstances. And who built an entire kingdom to try to make those circumstances permanent. The recording studio footage is another category of rare material that reveals something extraordinary. Because Michael Jackson in the recording studio was, by multiple accounts of producers and musicians who worked with him, an entirely different kind of phenomenon than Michael Jackson on stage. On stage, the performance was everything. The execution of what had already been created. But in the studio, the creation itself was happening in real time. And the rare footage that exists from various recording sessions across his career shows something that even people who knew his work well find surprising. The sounds he made while developing vocal parts. The humming, the beatboxing, the onomatopoeic approximations of what he wanted instruments to do before the instruments had done it. There is footage from the Thriller sessions where Michael is essentially composing an entire arrangement vocally, making sounds with his mouth that stand in for each instrument, describing the sonic architecture of what would become one of the most successful pieces of recorded music in history. without a score, without notation, purely from the inside of his own imagination, translated through the most immediate instrument available to him. His voice. That footage is priceless not because it is sensational, but because it shows the actual mechanism of genius operating in real time. And that is genuinely rare in a way that most footage of most famous people simply is not. But no one expected this. Because among the rarest camera moments ever captured of Michael Jackson, is footage that didn't make any documentary, didn't surface in any estate-authorized release, and only exists because someone with a camera happened to be in the right place at exactly the right moment. Footage of Michael Jackson, alone, in what appears to be a hotel corridor, dancing. Not rehearsing, not performing for anyone, just dancing, the way people dance when they are completely alone and the music in their head is too insistent to ignore. Brief, unself-conscious, the kind of movement that happens when the body does what it has always done, automatically, instinctively, without the scaffolding of performance around it. And in those few seconds of footage, in that accidental, unintended glimpse of Michael Jackson simply being inside his own body in a moment of private joy, you see something that thousands of hours of concert footage never quite captured. The dancer without the dance. The person underneath the performer. Existing, briefly, without anyone watching. Or so he thought. What these rare moments collectively reveal is something that the managed, mediated, controversy-shaped version of Michael Jackson's public story consistently obscured. A person of extraordinary complexity who existed, genuinely and fully, only in the spaces between the performances. The spaces where the cameras weren't supposed to be running. Where the image management had briefly broken down. Where the gap between the public version and the private one briefly closed, and what you were left with was something more interesting, more human, more genuinely heartbreaking than any of the versions that were built for consumption. A man who could communicate something through music and movement that no one else in his generation could reach. Who was also, simultaneously, a person who had never fully learned how to exist outside the context of being extraordinary. Who found in rare unguarded moments a quality of presence and joy and ordinary humanity that the performance machine surrounding him spent decades inadvertently suppressing. The cameras that caught these rare moments were never supposed to tell this story. They were running for other reasons. Documentation, security, personal memory, the accidental record-keeping of people who happened to be near someone famous and pointed a lens in his direction without full understanding of what they were capturing. But collectively, assembled and examined with the distance of time, these fragments of unscripted footage add up to something that no biography has fully captured and no documentary has completely contained. The portrait of a human being who was, in his most private and unguarded moments, neither the saint his most devoted fans needed him to be nor the monster his harshest critics insisted on seeing. Just a person, complicated, damaged in specific and understandable ways. Extraordinary in ways that remain almost impossible to fully account for. And, in the rarest moments the cameras managed to catch, heartbreakingly, unmistakably, irreversibly real. That is what the rarest footage of Michael Jackson actually shows. Not scandal, not spectacle, not the carefully constructed mythology that the entertainment industry built around one of its greatest products. Just a man, caught, briefly and accidentally, in the act of being himself. And the fact that those moments are so rare, that they had to be caught accidentally because they could never have been staged, says everything about what it actually cost to be Michael Jackson. Everything about what was demanded, and what was surrendered, and what was